No, how would you respond to that? Do you give us hope, or are you giving us a message of despair? Thank you.
Thank you. I could hear that. Well, I don't want to draw the analogy too closely. There are plenty of differences, but it's a bit what many anti-apartheid activists said in the late 1980s. Can you give us a message of hope? Well, there was a message of hope, it turned out. The message of hope was that the United States would join the world. And when it did, the apartheid system collapsed. What came out of it is not very beautiful. There are plenty of problems in South Africa. But nevertheless, overcoming apartheid was quite a significant event. And moving on to a peaceful two-state settlement in accordance with the world opinion and international law, well, that would be a step forward too. So yeah, and that's a possibility. It came close to realization at Taba. Things have changed, but not materially, and it's a possibility now. Is it a good solution? Not in my opinion. Since childhood, just to make a personal comment, in the 1940s, when I was a teenager, I was a Zionist youth leader, active Zionist youth leader, opposed to a Jewish state. That was part of the Zionist movement at the time. Opposition to a Jewish state. And my own groups I was associated with were committed to binationalist Arab-Jewish community based on Arab-Jewish working-class cooperation, socialist institutions, and so on. And it wasn't a wild dream, and it's not a wild dream today. But it has, in order to get there, I think it's a better solution. You have to go in stages. There's no use saying, I'd like everyone to live in peace. You know, that's fine. I'd like everyone to live in peace too. It becomes a serious proposal when you explain how we get from here to there. And in this case, to get to what in my view has always been a better settlement, requires moving in stages. And I don't see any proposal on the table other than the one I mentioned. First stage, two-state settlement. And we all know what that means. There's been an international consensus on that for 35 years. And pretty much what was almost reached at Taba. So that's the first stage. And it can be reached if the U.S. changes its policy. Beyond what would the effects be? Well, I suspect that the effects would be it would lessen the cycle of violence. It would lessen the level of hostility. People would begin to be able to act in their own interests as human beings, not as just representatives of an ethnic nationalist group. And they would see, as has often happened in the past, that their interests require closer integration. Anyone who's familiar with the territory knows that drawing a line through it doesn't make any sense, wherever the line is. It's just too closely integrated. So I suspect that people would begin to move towards commercial, cultural, social, other arrangements, and gradually you would move maybe towards some kind of federation and possibly closer integration, and also integration into the region. I mean, states aren't permanent institutions. They have no inherent legitimacy. And they're a particular, pretty bad way of organizing the world. They've been imposed over the world by savagery. I mean, Europe was the most savage place in the world for centuries while they were trying to impose a nation-state system, which just doesn't fit people's lives. You know, they're too diverse, they're too complex. Nation-state system forces them into a rigid structure that has nothing to do with their interests, which is why it's so violent. In Europe, it took centuries. If you look over the rest of the world, practically every major conflict going on is a result of European imperialism and its effort to impose state systems where they don't belong. That cuts through borders, you know, it breaks groups, it separates groups from one another. Like take, say, what's now called AFPAC, Afghanistan, Pakistan. The imperial line that the British drew, the Durand line, separates people who are identical. The Pashtun are the same on both sides of the border. They don't accept the border, nor should they. And just about every border in the world is like that. Well, okay, they can be overcome too. Europe, in fact, has been moving towards eroding the borders. I think that's very healthy. This region, the Middle East region, could also do so. And there is, after all, a model. It wasn't a very attractive model in many ways, but it had some of the right properties, namely the Ottoman Empire. Nobody wants to restore the Ottoman Empire, its brutality, corruption, everything else. But it was right in some ways. It didn't have borders. You could go from Cairo to Istanbul, to Baghdad and so on without passing any checkpoints. And groups could run their own affairs. The Greeks could run their affairs in their own part of the city and so on. And it's a pretty sensible way for people to live. And you need other institutions. We're a different world. But I think it could move in that direction too. But you can't, it doesn't make any sense to propose these things unless you give a way to get there. And I don't know of any way or any suggestion of any way except a two-state settlement. And I think that is within reach. It's come close several times. It can be reached today. We know how. And I think that's about as hopeful as it was to oppose apartheid in 1988. And opposing apartheid turned out to be the right position. A couple of years later, it was gone. And I think that could be true here, too.
Thank you very much, Professor, for this very much valued lecture. My name is Dalia Namari. I'm a reporter for the Egyptian television. I'm covering your lecture for TV and would like to ask you a question. I'm sorry if you have to repeat something that you already said, but what is your comment on Israel prohibiting you to enter the Palestinian territories? Why do you think Israel did that? And are you afraid that this is turning into an apartheid system with all means? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand.
Why does Israel not permit people to move within the territories? We should talk about Europe helping that.
Why does Israel not allow people to move freely within the territories? Is that the question?
Your comment on the fact that Israel did not permit you to enter Palestine.
Permit me to enter. That was just, in terms of, it has no cosmic importance. It's not of any general significance. It's a nuisance for me, it's a nuisance for you. It's a very minor example of something that's happening in Israeli policies, which are of much greater significance, namely their irrationality. They're acting in a very paranoid, irrational fashion, which is of great harm to themselves. I mean, a good example was the humiliation of the Turkish ambassador. I'm sure that you've followed that. Turkey is, outside the United States, their most valued ally. Since 1958, it's been their one major ally outside the United States. And in the region, it's their only ally. And to purposely, and it's an important one, from every point of view, including military. So Israel uses eastern Turkey for airfields and training and potential bases and so on. Well, to go out of your way to humiliate the ambassador of Turkey is a pretty ridiculous action. I mean, a rational state doesn't act that way. And it's the same when Joseph Biden showed up and they purposely insulted him by announcing the expansion of settlements. That's just not rational. And there are other things like that. An irrational state, any state is dangerous if it's irrational. A powerful military force with nuclear weapons is extremely dangerous if it's irrational.